Duke's House of Cards. This is an interview that I've been looking forward to for a while. Our guest is Shaun Donahue. This year marks the 50th anniversary of Mark the Bird Fidrich's phenomenal rookie season, and our guest has an interesting firsthand perspective of the Bird. Before we get to that, Shaun, I want to get into your background story. And you grew up in the Detroit area, is that correct?
Yeah, I grew up in the Detroit area. I went to high school there. I went to 2 years of college there. I went to a lot of Tiger games as a kid. Um, my when I was 10, my dad and my grandmother took me for my birthday to a Yankees game, and we had box seats on the third baseline, and it was quite an experience for me to, I don't know if you've ever been to Tiger Stadium, but it was just an absolute gem of a ballpark. And there's so much history there. And it was just a cathedral of baseball, to be honest with you. And when a little kid, they had these narrow passageways from the concourse out to the seats, and you could just see that green as you're walking out. And you got out there and you saw that whole field, and it was just like the most amazing thing ever. But the game itself did not turn out exactly how we had hoped. I believe that the Yankees took about a 10-0 lead, and then it started to rain, and the Tiger fans were cheering for the rain to come down so that in those days they gave rain checks. It's not like today where they just make them play in pouring down rain. But the rain stopped, and my dad and my grandmother wanted to go, and I said, no, I'm staying to the bitter end. And the Tigers had a runner on second, and Dick McAuliffe or somebody hit a single, and the run scored, and it was just the most amazing thing to me. But in years
One,
later, in the 60s, I sat in the center field bleachers a lot. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it was quite an extravaganza in those years relating to the 60s. The center field bleachers were kind of wild. I don't think it must cost more than like $1.50 or whatever to sit up there in the 60s, maybe even less. And so they would, the ritual was someone at the end of the row would light up a joint and pass it down. So you're the whole game, there's a joint coming your way every, half inning or so. And it was a total party up there in center field. And that's mainly where I went. When I was a kid, before I got my driver's license, I would take the bus down there, which is a kind of a sketchy area, and we were white kids
yeah.
from the suburbs. It wasn't the best idea, but we made it okay. And then finally, when we got our driver's license, we drove down there.
Well, unfortunately, I never saw a game at that ballpark. I would love to. And the thing comes to mind for me from seeing footage and photos over the years, those light standards, and of course, that 71 All-Star game hosted by Detroit. Reggie Jackson hit that
Hit the
monstrous
light
home
standard, yeah,
run.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, so you grew up in an era, Al Kaline, of course, I'm sure had to be one of your favorites. Willie Horton, Mickey Lolich. There's so many great players there in the 60s. Who were some of your favorites?
Well, I really like Willie Horton, and of course, uh, Al Kaline. I like Dick McAuliffe. I like Don Wirt too, who's a kind of an
Mm-hmm.
unsung hero of a third baseman. But I think my favorite was Dick McAuliffe because I was kind of small and I'm not a real athlete, and he kind of like had a lot of grit. You know what I mean? He made up for he wasn't a big strong guy, but he was a great player. And I liked all of them, going all the way back to Jake Wood. And I followed the Tigers. We lived and died with the Tigers, actually. And the World Series in 1968 was they had to quit school for that day because no one was going to pay any attention to anything that was going on in class because there were day games.
Yeah.
And so.
As I recall, McAuliffe had a real exaggerated batting stance, a real open batting stance, didn't he? Where
Yeah.
he almost faced the pitcher, as I recall.
Yeah, and it was kind of odd. It wasn't my batting stance in wiffle ball, that's for sure, but I still liked him. And as it turned out, I actually met Willie Horton in subsequent years. And he had the batting stance like this,
Mm-hmm.
up here. And it was just a thrill to be able to meet him. And I can talk about the circumstances of that as if we get along here, but because that was later in my career. I actually did have a fairly long career in sports as a cameraman. And
Well, I want to touch on a couple other things. You mentioned wiffle ball. The two things I love to ask guests: did you collect baseball cards? Did you play wiffle ball growing up?
well, I had a really great baseball card collection. And I was really into cards that were old when I was a kid, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I was around between 6 and 10 years old, kind of, and so I had cards from the 50s, and I really loved my collection. And we bought the cards that had the gum that came in it, the
Yep.
stick of gum that came in there, and um, so I eventually I became a news cameraman in Tucson, where I went to college. I don't want to get too ahead of myself here, but um, one of my assignments was to cover a baseball card convention.
Uh-huh.
And so I went to this baseball card convention. I was just an assignment. I didn't know anything, and I had no preconceived idea of it. And we started interviewing people, and I started looking at the cards, and I was like, "Hey, I have that card, and the price was like $20 or something like that, or $10 or whatever." And I was like, "Holy crap! I got a whole shopping bag. Must be worth $1,000, So I thought. I mean, I'm sure the condition had to do with it. So. After my first semester of college, I was not eligible to work at the campus TV station. So my mom made me come home for the summer to work at my busboy job. So the first thing I did when I got home was run up to the attic and looked for that bag of baseball cards. And you know the story.
You're going to make me cry. Go ahead.
Mom tossed it.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say
Actually, she
that.
said she tossed it, but then years later, she was a teacher, and she finally told me that a kid had had some bad problem, and she gave him the cards to cheer him up. So it did actually go to a kid. It wasn't actually thrown away as I thought, but nonetheless, I was never able to claim my $1,000 or what I thought I had in value of credit cards. I mean, I think one of my older cards was Carl Furillo. Do you know who that is?
Oh yeah, the Dodger outfielder had a cannon for an arm, from what I understand.
Yeah, it was it was a card with a yellow circle on that had, I think,
Uh-huh.
the team logo or whatever. I don't know, but I had a lot of older baseball cards, which were old to me, and that was in the '60s. So they
Yeah.
must have been, at least from the when did they start making baseball cards?
Well, the modern era we would consider probably from late 40s, in particular in early 50s when Topps got into the business, and for a while you would have had Topps and Bowman during that classic era for cards in the 1950s. So, and did you play a lot of wiffle ball with the neighborhood kids?
Oh yeah, wiffle ball every
Yeah.
day, every day. We even had dramatized Tiger spring training in the backyard, and we were the players, and we played wiffle ball. It was nonstop wiffle ball, to be honest with you, because we lived on a suburban street, and that's what we had kind of room for, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also, we had the cereal box cards, right? Where
Post
you
cereal.
would cut the box and
Hmm.
cut the cards out, but those weren't, like, we didn't think of them as good as Tops, but they were, they're baseball cards. We collected them.
Yeah. So let's talk about June 28th, 1976. It's a Monday night game. Mark Fidrich and the Tigers are hosting the New York Yankees. It's the ABC Monday night game of the week. It's probably one of the legendary games in baseball history, certainly for the 1970s. And you were there. And explain in what capacity and how you ended up there, because this is a great story.
Well, my seat was as close to the field as you could get and still be behind the screen. I mean, I was right on top of the whole Fidrich. And the foul territory was pretty big there, but not huge, so I was close. But to say how I got there, I just have to back up a little bit in that I left Michigan, and I had taken a year off from college to kind of decide what I wanted to do. And so I decided I wanted to be in broadcasting. and I decided I didn't like winter. So the University of Arizona in Tucson had a public broadcast station on campus, radio, television, and FM, and warm weather during football, baseball, or the school year. And I was
Hmm.
like, okay, I'm going. So while I was there, my very first semester, ABC Sports came to the university, and they covered a national wrestling championship as part of ABC Wide World of Sports.
Right.
And the campus directors of the TV station invited the director and producer of the show to come to the TV studio and give a little talk to the interested students. So we're in the TV studio, and there's maybe not that many, as many interested students as I thought there would be, but I was one of them. And he mentioned that ABC has a roster of college kids all over the country that they hire as independent contractors for various events. And how you get on that is you give them a call and give them your address, and they send you like a quarterly or semi-annual list of all the upcoming ABC events that they might need someone on, right? So, as I mentioned before, I was ineligible to work at the campus station because I'd only taken TV 101, and you had to have 101 and 102. And my mom was like, okay, she was a little skeptical of the TV thing. It sounded like a lot of people were skeptical of me. They're like, oh, do you want to be Johnny Carson and stuff like that? They didn't understand that it was an industry that had a lot of employees and people, jobs that were behind the scenes. So, um, so she made me come home and take my busboy job. So there I was in Detroit, and I get the list, and there it is, right on there, Monday Night Baseball, Detroit, Michigan. So I'm like, I run to the phone, I call them up, and I said, "Do you need someone?" And they said, "Yes, we need someone. Come to X and such place in the stadium at such and such time, and here's the guy to contact." So I went down there, and it was so exciting for me to be there because I had a past that got me on. I could go on the field, right? And I had never been on the field at Tiger Stadium. So I met up with the guy, and he was like an operations manager or something, and he gave me this suitcase that said Jugs on the side of it in big tall letters, Jugs. And he opened it up and he showed me it was a radar gun, right? It was the kind of radar gun that like the highway patrol would use. And he showed me a little bit how to use it. Like you had to trigger it, right? You had like, if something was happening, you had to trigger it and it would give you a reading. I believe it was similar to what the highway patrol used. And I think it was fairly recently involved in the broadcast because they clearly did not have a crew person hired to do it, so that it was kind of risky to just depend on, some random college kid that's going to show up. So he showed me how to use it. And so I was walking around for a couple hours with this suitcase that said Jugs on it, right? So I was walking down the warning track past the Yankees dugout, and Doc Ellis was coming up the stairs, and he looks at me and says, "Hey, open up that suitcase and let me see them Jugs." And so I was pretty anxious to, get to my spot because it was attracting a little bit of attention, walking around with a suitcase that had Jugs in it.
So let's set the mood and the tone for what was going on that night. Fidrich was coming into this game. People in Detroit certainly knew they had something special. The rest of the country had probably heard a little bit about this guy. It's a whole different world back then where there's no ESPN 24-hour sports, not all games broadcast. But it was a packed stadium, and people were excited. The locals were excited to see the bird. And can you just describe what that atmosphere was like that night?
Well, as you say, it was before even cable TV. I mean, there was only like the sports section and maybe the sports highlights on the news. And he was already a phenomenon in Detroit, and everybody knew about him. But as part of my job, I had a headset, and I was on the PL line. They call it the PL line. So because the director would ask me how fast was that last pitch, that kind of thing, and so I had it was so fortunate. I heard the whole thing of how they do it, what's recorded, what's live, and so as the game went on, I could hear them talking about like this is really something, and they're not stupid. They jumped on it, and they had replays of him, going around, and there was a lot of discussion between the producer, the director, everybody, and the camera people about how let's capture this. Stay on them is what it was, and it was a beautiful summer
Because
night.
you didn't know what he was going to do next.
No, and it was a beautiful summer night, and the place was packed, and you're just waiting for him to like go into his act, you might say, and he's turning around, he's talking to himself, and then one of the things he would do that they were really into on the telecast was, how in the mound the pitchers land in different spots, right, with their landing foot, and they make a little like groove, right, and so the other pitchers like groove or divot, whatever you want to call it, when he landed wasn't where he wanted to land. So he would get down on his hands and knees and fill in the divot from the other pitcher. And they loved it on the broadcast. They're like, oh, get on it, close up of the hand, like patting down the dirt and all that. And it was just amazing. That was essentially my first job in television. And I got to hear the whole how they do it, and not only that, I was kind of part of it because periodically they would ask me how fast was that last pitch, right?
Right.
It's not like today where it's just on there. It was like a kind of a new thing, and there was a little bit of a learning curve to the gun because you had to really catch it at the right time. It's not like a car comes down the road for a long time. It's like, I don't know how long a pitch takes. It can't be more than like a second or two, right?
Right.
So sometimes I would catch it wrong and I would get the ball going out, like on a hit. And I could see if it came up like 103, I was like, okay, well, he's not throwing 103, clearly. No. I don't think he even threw faster than like 95, did he?
Well, that's something that I want to touch on here in just a second. So just some things about that game for those who are not familiar with it. This is the first thing that's interesting. The game duration was only an hour and 51 minutes. That kind of speaks a lot about how the game has changed. The Tigers won the game 5-1. Both pitchers went the distance. Ken Holtzman was the starter for the Yankees. Fidrich was the starter for the Tigers. They both went the distance. For the Bird, went 9 innings, gave up 7 hits, 1 run, no walks, only struck out 2. He then was 8-1 on the season after that. And kind of touching on what you said about his velocity, looking at his stats at the end of the season, he pitched 250 innings. He only struck out 97, so he was not a strikeout pitcher, but he had incredible control, and he really relied on his defense. And I think that Monday night game really encapsulated that for a national audience, that no, this guy wasn't going to blow you away with this stuff, but for a young pitcher, he was pretty savvy.
Well, it was in today's age, it's amazing. He was on the mound at the end of the game.
Yeah.
Which was sort of the norm in those days. I mean, the pitcher was expected to pitch a complete game, but as you said, the game got done early, right? Before their allotted time. And that became clear starting like in the 8th inning. So there was a lot of jabber on the headphones like, what are we going to do? You know what I mean? And they're like, okay, get Euchre to come down to the field. Like he left the broadcast booth in like the 9th or whatever, and tell him to find a little kid. And so Euchre went to the stands and found some little kid and was holding him in his arms and saying, what do you think of the Bird? And all this, and they were, and that happened like right in front of me because they used the cameras that were, there's no like roving camera or anything. They had to use the stationary cameras, and you had to get the kid and come around, in front of the camera. And, Euchre is so funny, and the little kid he picked was, I don't know, I guess entertaining. So they were just making up stuff about the bird to fill to the end of the hour.
And then the game gets over with, and the crowd just goes bonkers. If you go back and you watch that broadcast, I bet you thought that stadium was going to fall apart. The crowd was so loud, and they wanted to see him again. And that's what's also part of the charm, is when they were able to get him back out on the field, and he was just, you could see he was just overwhelmed by the whole scene. And then they interviewed him, for that broadcast. But I find what happened after the game just as interesting as what happened during the game.
Absolutely. But for me, you have to remember, it was my very first job in television. I'm working, and I'm really trying to concentrate. And I'm really just fascinated by how they, kind of just ran with it in a live broadcast. You know what I mean? They just adapted to what was going on, get Fidrich out there, get Euchre, and talk about it, show the highlights, show them patting down the mound and all that. And I was just kind of, you got to remember, I'm sitting like here, and here's the net behind home plate. And I got my gun, and the thing's over, and I'm overwhelmed myself with the whole thing of all the noise and the talking in the headphones about what are we going to do, you know what I mean? And then to see all this interviews, and I had never seen the broadcast to this day, but I saw Bob Euchre with the little kid. I'll say that much. He was right in front of me. And I saw him with Fidrich. I think that happened more by the dugout. That wasn't so close to me. But the whole thing was just an overwhelming experience for my very first job in television, after having taken one broadcasting class at the University of Arizona.
Well, the importance of that game in baseball history is that that's the night where he became a national sensation. You talked about it earlier. The hometown fans knew what they had. After that night, the next day, the whole nation was talking about this guy. And it just was, again, if you weren't there at the time, if you don't understand how the game was different, how the coverage of the game was different, it may not make sense how somebody could become an overnight sensation because of one TV broadcast, but that really was what happened.
Absolutely. Well, you have to remember that, first of all, it was a confluence of a lot of factors. The main one being it was against the Yankees.
Yep.
The ABC Sports, all of it, the media, it's all New York centric. If it hadn't been against the Yankees, it may not even have been broadcast on Monday Night Baseball. So they got Monday Night Baseball, they got the Yankees. It's a beautiful night, and they got a guy circling around talking to himself, and it was just, the whole thing just worked in an amazing, fortunate fashion. But like I said, I think it's my opinion that if it weren't against the Yankees, it would not have had the impact that it did. It's just the way sports broadcasting was in those days.
Shaun, did you ever have a chance to meet Mark later?
No, I never did. I went back to Arizona, and I started my career in television, and I didn't even go back to Tiger Stadium, I think, till maybe after it was Comerica Park, and then I even didn't go there until even maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
You've alluded a little bit about your career, so how did that evening springboard into things that would collide for you?
Well, it made me fascinated about sports television, like listening to the director, how he called the shots. And then I also worked as a PA, they called it, on golf. I did the 1977 PGA Championship at Pebble Beach. And so we got in, a bunch of us in a car, and drove to Pebble Beach. And so the pay was $15 a day. That was the pay. So if you got golf, that was 4 days. So if you had a whole car full of people, and we all have 4 days, we could pay for our gas and our food and everything. So we had a gang of us that went from the U of A over there. And then I ended up working in Tucson as in the news cameraman, but I really gravitated towards sports, and so I worked in Tucson, and then 2 stations in Tucson, and 3 including the campus station. Then I moved up to Phoenix, and I covered my first professional team I covered was the Phoenix Suns. Before that was just college. And then after that, I moved to San Francisco, and I ended up working for ESPN for around over 25 years in the heyday of San Francisco sports, where I covered all the 49ers Super Bowls. I covered the Giants World Series, the Warriors 5 NBA Finals, and it was just an amazing. I was very fortunate. I didn't say, well, I'm going to go to San Francisco because I think there's going to be a lot of sports there, but it was just luck, because the way it works for ESPN is they have people like me who cover regions, right? So my region was Northern California and Western Nevada, so which was basically Reno. So just in the years that I was there, those 25 years, there was the Raiders were still there, the A's were still, having championship teams. It was just an amazing thing, and that's how I happened to meet Willie Horton. There was an All-Star game, or I guess it was a playoff game between the A's and the Tigers at the Oakland Coliseum, and I was working with Pedro Gomez, who died recently, but was an ESPN reporter and great friend, and he knew I was a Tiger fan, and he comes over to me and says, come here, you got to come over here. And I'm going, what? And he takes over and goes, it's Willie Horton. And so Pedro Gomez introduced me to Willie Horton, and we chatted for a bit about Detroit and everything. It was just great, So I covered I had these socks that had a Tigers logo on it, right? Well, it was covered by my pant leg. So I was waiting. One of my jobs was to go on the field at the end of the game and do an interview with a star player. And so I was I was waiting to go out beside the dugout, beside the cage, batting home plate at the Oakland Coliseum. And it was Verlander was pitching, and it was against the Tigers. And the PR lady from the Tigers was there. And I said, hey, and I lifted up my sock. I showed her my Tiger logo on my socks, and she said, yeah. But I have to say,
Shaun,
in all honesty, I went into the Tigers clubhouse because they won and they were celebrating. And I just thought this is going to be the greatest thing ever. These are, my hometown boyhood heroes. All the Tigers are going to, this is going to be great. They're going to be spraying champagne. And I went in there, and they're just as big of jerks as any other baseball players, to be honest with you. There's a bunch of young kids being arrogant and stuff. And I was like, oh, well, I guess, you have your dreams or whatever. But
well, Shaun Donahue has been our guest. You have had a fascinating career. You've come a long way from playing wiffle ball on the streets of Detroit, from making that one phone call that ended up, in the Monday night baseball game, to everything that you've done. And thank you for spending some time with us and sharing your stories. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me. This was great. I enjoyed talking with you and reminiscing. Actually, I hadn't thought about that game until you really mentioned it,
There was something to be there for sure.
Absolutely. I was very fortunate. All right. Thank you.
All right.